Hi, and thank you for joining me in this conversation today. As always, I'm Abbie. This is Stories Lived, Stories Told, and here's what I know. It is easy to say that we value dialogue and leaning into challenging conversations. However, it is a lot harder to actually embody and practice those things. Today we are finishing up our conversation with Jennifer Furlong, communication coach and host of the Communication 24/7 podcast. You'll want to pause now and listen to the first two parts of this conversation, which I'll link for you in the description if you have not done that yet. I'm framing this episode in a slightly different way than I normally do. In every episode, I hope that my conversation partners and I are modeling meaningful conversation, but I especially hope that that's true today. The topic of Jennifer and I's conversation today is one that people have different opinions on, and relationships to, and experiences with, meaning that it kind of naturally can lend itself to be more polarizing for people. I imagine that as you listen to this, you might feel discomfort and become aware of tension that exists between Jennifer and my differing perspectives. However, if you're paying attention, I think that you'll see, as I definitely did, as this conversation developed, that we actually were more similar in our intentions than we realized. I personally am proud of the way that Jennifer and I were able to meet each other in this conversation and lean into the discomfort, so I invite you to do the same. Some questions that I ask you to keep in mind as we go into this conversation are, first, to ask yourself, what am I feeling? Ask yourself this over and over as you listen to this. Pay attention to the reactions you have to what is said, how it makes you feel, and then go one step further and ask yourself why. Second, I want you to pay attention to all the moments in this conversation where our differences could have gotten the better of us, but didn't. Again, I ask you to stick with us through this whole conversation because there is a lot to be learned here. So, with all these questions in mind, let's begin.
You could tell me if, this is maybe not how you think about the platinum rule or how you relate to it, but in some of the things that you'd written that I'd read is that you had said, you don't really resonate with this big conversation that's going on around like pronouns. And that doesn't resonate with you, but maybe that's really important for someone else. And so, it doesn't hurt you to ask someone their pronouns or use their pronouns. For me, when I think about language, like there's very different connotations for me between girl and woman. And I'm like, I want to not be called a girl. I'm an adult person.
Yes.
And I would ask that of other people. Those are some language things, examples of that. And there's more physical ways of how we treat other people. But that's just kind of what I was thinking in terms of really putting that platinum rule to work in our lives.
Yeah. That is such a fantastic example. And I'm so glad you brought that up because this is going to be one of those topics that there's going to be tension in that topic. And I love it. I love this conversation. The whole pronoun thing. I love this example because you're right. Like with me being, I'm a conservative. And so for me, the whole pronoun thing, like I don't have my pronouns on my email or, like when I go online, I don't have my pronouns anywhere because to be honest with you, if someone were to ask me my pronoun, I would be offended. That's the place that I come from is like, I'm offended. Now, I will respect someone else if they say, hey, I prefer that you refer to me as she, her, or whatever it is, then I'm the type of person that you're right. It's not going to take anything away from me in our conversation. It's important for me, for us to be able to connect. So I'll use the pronouns that you're asking me to use, in that moment. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that I have to agree with that.
It's that tension. It's that dissonance of that not being something that, is something that you need for yourself can be true at the same time as that being something that's really significant for someone else. Yeah.
And vice versa, though, like there is also something else, I'll be perfectly honest. Sometimes I take issue when someone says, yeah, you're a cis woman. And I'm like, I'm a woman. And so again, it goes back to that language and that tension of how do we understand language, and it's the specificity of the language. So for me, like, I don't see it's necessary to identify me as a cis woman because I'm a woman, and so, but that's where the willingness to engage and lean in on those conversations. Now, someone will hear this and they will take issue, with that. And that's perfectly within their right. But if you want to go through the world having others respect, your opinion and understand where you're coming from, you have to also be willing to extend that same courtesy to someone else. And again, that doesn't mean you have to agree with me, just like I don't have to agree, with you on the entire topic of pronouns. But at least we can still sit here and have a dialogue about it and at least come to an understanding. If you can walk away from a conversation with somebody who has a completely different ideology from you on a certain topic, and you can say, well, I still don't agree with them, but I understand where they're coming from, then that's a pretty good day. That's a pretty good experience that you've had with that person to be able to do that.
If I can ask more, I'm curious about you saying that you'd be offended. I'm just curious about like what that means to you or where that comes from for you, because I think that for me, something that really guides me and that I try to be in my relationships, in my communication with others, in the interest of this being something that I believe works us toward a better social world, is being led with like open-mindedness and curiosity. And, almost this idea of, we said, we can't control other people. So I'm kind of like, live your life however you want. Asterisk, maybe, as long as that's not hurting other people.
Asterisk for everything.
Right. So it's like, as long as it's not hurting other people. And so to me, like, although, my like gender is not something I've ever questioned. Honestly, for me, like, is not a struggle that's been very like prominent in my life that shaped my identity in the way it has a lot of other people. But I think a difference is that I wouldn't say like I'm offended if people say I'm a cis woman, because I understand what it means for that community. And I don't think it's in my right I don't want to discredit the experiences of one individual or a whole people group, because I know that can be true for them and me at the same time. So I don't feel like it puts me out to include my pronouns at the end of an email. It doesn't, put me out to use that language of, cis or all of these identifiers that people talk about. Or, I'm just curious about that feeling of being offended that you experience.
Yeah. I think we have come to a place in our culture, we put a lot of emphasis on identity rather than the substance of a person, like the internal, like, who are you? Like the labels will only take us so far, right? We have assumptions that come along with labels, right? And that's how, the stereotyping, all of that can come into play, because we will have assumptions based on someone's label. It doesn't tell me anything about you, really, about you as a person. And that's really what I'm interested in. It like, for me, if somebody says, okay, my pronouns are, she, her, I'm like, okay, good for you. And so what? Like, I don't care, but that's just for me, because for me, it's like, well, who are you? Like, Abbie, I want to get to know you. It doesn't matter to me if you are she, he, him, they. At the end of the day, I don't care what the pronouns are, because I just want to have a conversation with you so I can get to know you as a person. I want to get to know, what do you like? What do you dislike? What do you believe in? And why do you believe in that? And, how did you come to understand that, and how did you come to learn about that? And so I think our conversations as of late have become so consumed with the superficial. Now, from my point of view, I use the word superficial. Somebody else may think, well, what I'm calling myself, my pronouns are the most important thing to me in the world.
Right.
And from their perspective, that could be true. I don't understand that from my perspective. I guess because I've had so many experiences that for me have superseded gender and pronouns and identity. Like truly, the experiences that I've had, I guess it for me has just kind of helped me reach a different place in life where, all of that stuff, it just, at the end of the day, it's kind of like, how much money do you have in your bank account? Or, what label do you want to have? Okay. At the end of the, does that change who you are, like you as a person, and so the whole idea of labels, I just am like fundamentally, I guess, just opposed. And I'll tell you, I think I know where it stems from. I think I know. I've had this conversation with my therapist too. When I went into the Marine Corps,
Mm-hmm.
so my recruiter was not having it, right? He had never put a woman in the Marine Corps before, ever. This was in 91. And so I come bebopping up, I get my hair in my ponytail. I'm looking all cute. I'm like 17 years old. And I'm going to be a Marine. He's like, okay, yeah, whatever. And, so he told me to be at the office, 8 a.m. on Saturday, yada, yada, yada. So I show up and he looked completely surprised that I was there standing in the office, ready to sign up to be a Marine. He sat me at his desk and he walked to the back where the gunny was. And I could hear them talking. He was like, Gunny, there's this girl out here. What do I got to do to get rid of her? And I heard the gunny respond something like, well, give her all the tests. And when she fails them, you can get rid of her. So at that moment, I felt a challenge that I'm going to have to prove to them, right, that I'm worthy of wearing that uniform. So I was like, okay, I'll play your little game. And I ended up taking all the tests and I ended up acing all of their tests. And then I ended up going to boot camp and I ended up graduating in the honor platoon at boot camp. And then, I ended up wearing the uniform and I noticed, and I still think this is probably a part of the culture in the Marine Corps, women Marines were referred to as WMs, and it was so important to point out gender. It was so important to point out, oh, woman, the quantifier. That pissed me off so much because I felt like it was well, wait a minute here. I'm wearing the uniform and I earned this uniform. I'm a Marine, and do not identify me as a woman Marine or a female Marine. I'm a Marine. Mm-hmm. So I spent so much time trying to get away from the qualifiers because to me, it was indicating, something about, it was a differentiation. And I didn't like that. I didn't like that at all. And I think that's what has carried me through today. Like, it doesn't matter that I'm a woman. It doesn't matter if I'm female, it doesn't indicate anything about what I'm capable of doing. It doesn't indicate anything about what I'm able to achieve. For someone else, if they focus on identity, if they focus on gender or, any of the labels, for them, I guess it will give them some type of indication of what they think about me, but really it doesn't give them any indication of anything about me. And I think, so that's the place that I'm coming from. I went to the DMV to get my, my license plate, and the woman at the window was like, oh, I see that you served during Desert Storm. And I said, yeah. And she was like, well, you can get that on your license plate. And I was like, no, I'm good. Just veteran on the license plate. And she was like, okay, well, do you want woman veteran on your license? I was like, no, I'm good. Just a veteran. And she was like, oh, well, you can do that. And I was like, no, veteran is fine. I don't want woman veteran on my license
No one's
plate.
Asking the men, do you want male veteran on your license plate? Yeah.
Exactly. And so, I think maybe that's where it's coming from. My my hesitation to use labels, because I have seen how they can be used in a way that just, it gives someone an indication or an ability to just make assumptions. And, you know, and those assumptions don't do anything. They have nothing to do with what you can do or achieve as a person. Yeah. Like, I don't care what your gender or what your pronouns are. All I care about is, do you have integrity? Are you honest? You know, are you a good person? You know, how do you treat others? That's really what I'm interested in.
Yeah.
You know?
I really appreciate you sharing that story. That helps give so much context and helps me to understand your perspective like infinitely more.
Yeah.
And it's understandable why you see labels as not being helpful, because you have had a negative experience with labels. And I think that's, again, one of those, like, what I would call like a both and, like when two things are true. Both, you have had a negative experience with labels being a limiting thing for you.
Yeah.
And some people have had experience with label, or maybe they'd use different language, you know, that was like liberating for them, because I love language. And so I can see what you're saying about that labels do limit us.
Yeah.
And I can also celebrate the use of certain words to identify ourselves because an idea resonates with us.
Yeah.
And I can see it as being a really powerful thing. And so I don't know how you intend it, but you know, when you say, I don't care about your pronouns, the first way I was hearing that was really dismissive of like, that doesn't matter. And I wanted to go on the defense.
Yeah.
And now I think hearing that story and hearing you say again, I don't care about your pronouns, I can hear it in a different way. It's not that it doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter to you. It's that I'm using something different. And I think for me, it is that open-mindedness, that curiosity, that asking that question is that if someone, you know, lifts off labels or identities to you, that you say, and what does that mean to you? You know, what's the layer behind that? Yeah, I think that, I mean, really hearing that story is so helpful. And I would even look at, you know, that first part of your story of, you know, okay, how do I get rid of this girl when she inevitably fails, blah, blah, blah. I see that through a huge lens of gender affecting, you know, the way that you were treated. And maybe you don't see it as that. And again, that's, you know, neither here nor there. But I think something big that I'm thinking about a lot is on this podcast, in my life, trying to avoid making generalizations, because I realize I can only speak for myself.
Yes.
I can say this has been my experience. And if other people resonate with it, have something similar, that's really beautiful. If they have something different, then I learn from that. And I don't have to worry about having made a big generalization and saying this is true for everyone, and then having to backtrack when someone says, actually, it's not. And so, you know, it's like, you saying pronouns don't matter. I almost want to tag on to the end of that to Jennifer, you know, to me, whatever. We can only like speak for ourselves and leave space for other people to do the same. Right. Because when we talk about stories,
that is a great point you just made. And as a matter of fact, it makes me think when I say, I don't care about pronouns, a better way for me to remember specificity, right? We talk about specificity in language. A more accurate way for me to say that would be, well, pronouns don't matter to me in learning about you, you know, like pronouns don't matter to me in that I want to get to know you as a person. You know, the pronouns are incidental. Pronouns are like secondary for me.
I think that to me, the connotations of that compared to what we said earlier is so different. That to me is an invitation in.
Right.
Rather than something that could shut people down if they, like you said, you know, we don't come out of the womb with all the tools to communicate, to have really hard conversations, to navigate that in a healthy, productive way. We're learning it all the time. We make mistakes, and, you know, you know, maybe having this conversation is going to change like the way that you and I, you know, go forward, go out into the world and try to learn about people and the language that we use. And you know, for me, the label thing, one that I, you know, resonate with is that it's this shared meaning, you know, a label like I would say like, oh, I'm a feminist, and I would use that word almost because it's like a blanket statement of something that people might recognize. It's a familiar enough word that people would know generally what I'm saying when I say that. And then what I would love is to share my experience of what that means to me and why I identify with that. Because to me, even as I use that word, it's less important the word and more important my experience of that concept.
Exactly. Yeah.
And 100,000 different people would use that word and mean 100,000 different things.
Exactly.
And so there's beauty in, there is some beauty, I think, in the things that are general, in the things that we can say, this is a human thing we experience. We experience grief. We all experience loss. We all experience, death, love, beginnings and endings of relationships. There are things that it's like we all experience, and there's beauty in like the solidarity of that. And like you're saying, there's a lot of beauty in that specificity of being able to say, this is who I am. And so I think that's maybe that label conversation, is that on one level, we use labels as this is the language we have right now. To say what we mean. This is what the shared meaning around it is. And I don't want that without the specificity.
Yeah, it does concern me, the whole, especially when people, I've noticed it's a trend now, and I'll see it more so on social media than when you meet someone in person. And I don't know, maybe it's indicative of age, or the culture or whatever. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but when somebody will introduce themselves, it'll be like, hey, I'm Jen. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a blah, 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 and fill in all the blanks of all the labels that exist. And it's almost like, hi, let me introduce myself, and I'm going to give you all my labels because this is what I think is going to make me most interesting, or I think this is the most important thing about me as a person.
But the way that I'm seeing it is that when we talk about challenging conversations, when we talk about, division that exists largely in our society, or even conflict that's in our interpersonal relationships, that is a deep thing. There's depth in those kinds of conversations. I think we find it a lot easier to stay on the surface. And so to me, those labels are, for some, there's like deep, deep meaning behind it, but it's a surface level representation of something maybe deeper. And so it feels quick to list off these kind of recognizable identities or labels before going into the story. It's almost, I'm seeing it in the same way of, you're at the store and someone's like, oh, how are you? I'm good. How are you? And it's like, are you good?
Yeah,
that's a surface level answer.
It's the script.
Right? Like if someone said, Jennifer, how are you doing? And you said, oh, I'm fine.
I'm good.
That doesn't share with them
not really
that,
good.
oh, I just moved. I'm going through a divorce. I am right in the middle of these messy, complex emotions.
It's chaos.
And so it's like this never ending struggle for me of how can I express all of the emotions, all the complexity of my own experience. How can I best get that across to people? And I think, in the world that we're in, where probably the majority of people don't have, the highest level of a communication competency, then what I see this as is us reverting to what's easier, which is that surface level. And in my mind, a phrase that I really like is that just because one option, one route, one path is easier doesn't mean it's better. A lot of those harder things to engage in, like when I do have hard conversations with my parents or with my boyfriend, like what's on the other side of that is almost always better because I have expressed myself and I have gotten to understand them better. That's how I relate to it. Again, I'll always speak for me, but that's how I relate to it.
And I love that we're having this conversation because I think it really is a great way to model how to have a conversation about a topic that a lot of people, it could easily go off the rails, because if someone doesn't agree with you on something, it's easy to shut down and say, well, they're just a mean person, and then, the dialogue completely shuts down and then it's over. And then there's no opportunity to really dig in a little deeper and really learn about, okay, well, what is this? And I'll see again, social media. God, I hate social media.
Honestly, me too.
I hate social media. I find it very concerning. I'll see these young people who will post these videos where they are just, you can tell that they're in pain. They're crying. Like, I do honestly believe that they are feeling pain because their grandma won't call them a he, or whatever the pronoun is that they want. Grandma won't call me this. And I understand that pain is visceral and they feel very disappointed. And my concern is, like, you got to find a way to transcend past that and understand that people are going to have certain ideas of who you are. And even if they don't use your pronoun, even if they think something about you because of a label, that doesn't make it true, and that was the experience I had going into the Marine Corps, with my recruiter. He saw this 17-year-old, girl walk in, because I know he considered me a little girl.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But that did not make it so. Like, you can see that, you can use the label, but that doesn't really make it, like, I did not have to go along with that. It did not crush whatever it was that I was like, you know what, now I'm gonna have to prove you wrong.
I see it. I really do see it in terms of stories of, like, what's the story that he had in his head about what women are capable of, or what his expectations of you were because of your gender. Yeah. And there's so many stories that exist out there that we didn't ask for. We didn't ask to be handed. We didn't ask to be created. We didn't experience the personal situations that led to that story being written. But like you said, it's almost like you were saying, I'm writing this new story for myself. And I would argue, and for him, and for the other women who are in the Marines, and a million other people with every gender,
Yeah, I could have easily left. I could have gotten upset. I could have been offended. I could have started crying. I could have left. I could have gone to the newspaper, to make him look bad, to make the Marine Corps look bad. I could have made this big old stink. And then where would that have gotten me? Like, how would that have made any type of positive impression or change? But saying, you know what, I understand that you look at me a certain kind of way, but that's not going to stop me. And now I feel like it's incumbent upon me to, like, create this new thing. And so I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it the best to my ability. And you know what? By the end, he was my biggest fan. He ended up being my biggest supporter. Like, nobody else in my family, none of my friends, nobody thought I could do it. But then as he continued to watch me and how hard I was working at it, he ended up being my biggest supporter out of everybody. That would not have happened if I had chosen to let him get to me and, leave. And it could have been, and then I would have just reinforced his impression,
I'm really coming back to this react versus respond.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because it's this one moment of, I talked about maybe a general tension that exists between life experiences in relationships, a dissonance that exists.
Yeah.
And then there's also, like, a tension in, like, I don't know, your heart or something, that exists when someone says something that doesn't match up with your experience. And it's in my head, it's simple math, it's like an equation. My experience equals the beliefs that I now have, or whatever. And if you only know your experience because you maybe haven't asked more questions, and then someone offers you another answer to what's on the other side of that equal sign that is not equal in your eyes, that your experience did not lead you to that same conclusion, it's like you're missing a part of the equation. Your experience, your belief. But if you only know the other person's belief and not their experience, I think it's that pushing forward, because you could react to that tension you feel in yourself and get out. And I think that's what you're saying right now.
Yeah.
Or you can go back to the very beginning of our conversation where we said, take a deep breath, take 10 seconds, take 1 minute, whatever, and respond instead of react. That's when you can lean in. That's when you can lean into this challenging thing. That's when
ask those questions.
You give a deep breath. Is a great tool to empower yourself to be able to lean in.
That's right. That's right.
And I think that really is in my eyes, like a perfect example of that. What's the difference between reacting and responding? I think a reaction normally is something that leads to disconnection, whereas a response can create more connection and understanding.
Right. Yeah. Because I mean, when we're reacting, we're leading with our emotions. And we know emotions can cloud judgment big time.
Yeah.
Emotions will cloud judgment every single time. And that doesn't mean that you have to ignore your emotions, but if you can recognize when the emotions are leading versus when you can lead with, good sound judgment, good reasoning,
Yeah. I feel very aware of when I feel like the language I use is my emotions are in control of me versus I'm in control of my emotions. And it does not feel good when my emotions are in control of me. I feel like I'm spinning out of control. If I'm that car on that racetrack you were talking about, I am spinning out of control. Right. I want to use my emotions to teach me things, to learn about myself and to fuel healthy responses. And for that to be so, can't control other people, can't control their reactions or responses. But that's maybe, when I say I can control myself and my choices, I want to have control over my emotions and my thoughts in a way that lets me learn from them and use them as I communicate about my communication, as I look at my communication, as I try to be intentional.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how this conversation has progressed. It reminds me of a lot of the conversations that I get into as a media analyst, because, like earlier I said, I have to have conversations with people from across the political spectrum, and we will read articles from a host of different sources, and we get into some pretty trashy sources. And so, and they talk in a whole host of different topics that are all hot button issues. And, but to have an opportunity to have those conversations, I think that's really where the magic happens. It can be uncomfortable sometimes. Now, the vast majority of the time we have conversations, everything's great. Every now and again, we'll get into a really difficult, conversation. But I view it as such an incredible privilege to be able to have a job that gives me the opportunities to do that. It has made such a huge difference for me, just as an individual in my own growth, in being able to have all of these different people now. I have all of these different people that I can reach out to who come from all of these different backgrounds and ideologies. And I know that I can be confident that I can ask them questions and have these conversations, and I will walk away having broadened my worldview. Just even if it's just slightly, more than what it is today. And again, it doesn't mean that I'm going to change, I don't necessarily have to change my opinion on things, but it does help us relate to each other. And I think that's what we need in our society right now. The division, we all know the division is, it's so huge right now, and people are afraid to have conversation with others whom they believe to be different from themselves. But I can tell you from firsthand experience, just, being in these positions of having these conversations, it has changed everything for me to be in that position, to have that privilege to have these conversations. So I just want to encourage people to even, I know it's a scary thing, but just try to come from a place of get the courage to find someone who may believe differently from you, just like how you did. You asked me the question about, the pronouns. Don't be afraid to ask someone, and come from a place of, I'm curious. I want to know more. Like, why? How did you, and if you can just do that with one person, a few days out of the week, and I think it will help guide you to a better understanding of the world, that exists around us. And it'll also help serve as a good tool to practice those communication skills. If you're not willing to put yourself out there and practice the things that you're not comfortable with, then you're never going to get better at at it. So
yeah, I mean, that's where my brain is all the time. And it's, again, something that's so much harder, done than said. But
oh yeah, it is
how do we
hard.
move from theory to practice?
Yeah. Yeah.
With all of this, in many areas of our lives. I see it from a communication perspective. But that's how I see things. But what I do like to end on for my conversations is to frame our conversation using this CMM language of a better social world, and the recognition that's important. That again goes back to what I would call pluralistic truths, is that everybody's experience can coexist. And I kind of see it as a chance to, reframe or, recap our conversation of what a better social world looks like. And I guess where I'm at after this conversation is that better social world looks like being guided by curiosity, asking how others want to be treated and treating them that way. Asking, even doing that personal reflection of asking how you want to be treated and expressing that.
Absolutely.
Clearly, taking that moment, learning, because it's definitely learning, practicing, how not to react and how to respond, and paying attention to how that changes your relationships and your interactions. What else is part of a better social world for you?
I think being willing to do that internal work. I think none of this is going to work if you're not honest with yourself in learning why you do react the way you react, or learning why you communicate the way you communicate. I think that's at the base of everything. That's the foundation for everything. And a lot of people are afraid, to dig deep and look within themselves to answer those questions. So I think that actually is probably at the core of everything. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we talked about shared meaning. I think a beautiful piece of this too, that is, in my eyes, maybe almost a prerequisite to having those deeper, more challenging conversations, is respect and a recognition of our own and other people's humanity.
Yeah.
If you can have a baseline of respect going into a conversation, I think that opens up so many doors, and that's definitely a way toward a better social world in my eyes.
And I think a huge thing too is, if you do get offended by something, it's not the end of the world. And sometimes you're just going to be offended. Yeah. And you just got to live with it.
Recognize your own experience and learn more about the experience of others.
Exactly. Because somebody else, they, regardless, they are not going to define who you are. Like, their opinions and the language that they use and the things that they say and do not define you. It doesn't change a damn thing about you as a person.
You get to define yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what it is to feel truly empowered, is to know, I know who I am, and I don't need anyone else to corroborate that. Right. Like, I know who
Absolutely.
I am.
Yeah. That's a huge thing for me of, what does it mean to, when you look outside for yourself, when you look for other people to tell you who you are?
Yeah.
What are you going to get back? Only you can know who you are.
That's right.
That is where our time with Jennifer ends, but of course, you don't have to leave behind this conversation and the things you thought and felt during it when this episode ends. Keep the conversation going in your life. As this conversation does end, I hope that you can consider what you might be able to take from the curiosity, vulnerability, and empathy that Jennifer and I modeled in this conversation, and also how you might be able to use it in your own life so that you can also lean into more conversations like this rather than opting out. I'm not going to say too much more because I want you to be able to spend some time figuring out what this conversation meant to you, because that's going to be different for everyone, and I want to give you the space to explore that. As always, I get to do this podcast with support from the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution. If you're looking for a community of people who know how to live out the dialogue value, then this is the place for you. I'll also ask you to please follow the show wherever you listen, leave a review and a rating, share this episode. Also, connect with me on Instagram at Stories Live, Stories Told Pod. on YouTube at Stories Lived, Stories Told, or on the website at storieslived.storiestold.com. Thank you so much for taking the time to do one or all of these, and thank you for showing up. Thank you for being curious, and thank you for being a part of this story. Until next time, I'm Abbie, and this has been Stories Lived, Stories Told.